Hello, my name's Dan L. I'm one of the migration engineers at Zumasys, and I've been asked to put together a little video on our migration station. You'll find this stuff under our knowledge base, and it will kind of explain the first steps of a migration. This is a question and answer type thing, so that it can get you comfortable with going to jBASE. Once these questions are answered, it's going to be a fairly smooth trip at that point. So we're going to start with the main topics on this would be, of course, what are we going to move? And there in that checklist, you'll find source. That's going to be your programs, your procs, your things that make the system run. Then there's going to be data. That's going to be the actual system information, like your customer file, your order file, your invoice file, those types of things. Then there's got to be people that get onto that system. That's your security and users. So we're going to have some questions on that. You know, who gets in, what they can get into, what they're limited to. And then you've got your connectivity and devices, and that's going to be the terminals. The dumb terminals could be that you're using GUI or using web-based application, those type of things getting into the system. You can have guns, scanners, different types of input devices, input and output devices that go via a interface other than the telnet that you're using for your dumb terminals. And then you've, of course, got your telnet, your terminals, your people that are entering data into the system, and et cetera. You've also got things that are coming out, your printer connections, your connections to other systems, and those type of things. So we've got some questions on that. So once you've got your source, your data, your security, your connectivity and devices, now you need to consider what you need to do to transfer that information over to your new jBASE server. And then we're going to cover just the very beginning, the prepping the new server, and that's going to be everything that's going to be covered in this video. We're going to get you to a point where you are ready to start your migration. And then we'll go over the next steps of the migration in other videos, because then it really is more dependent on what are you coming from. Where this is a general, no matter what type of system you're coming from, how are you going to transfer that information over to jBASE? So we'll start with the very beginning. Source. Where is it? First of all, I guess it's what is it? But what is it being the basic, the proc, the paragraphs, the macros, the scripts, and the other. Then how do you find those basic procs, paragraphs, macros, scripts, and other? We're not going to go real deep into this. This is not for learning multi-value, but it does kind of give you a beginnings of, as a developer, or if you're going to have us as Zumasys do it, how are we going to find these things? So the very beginning is you're in your account. Now, most people have some sort of an account like this. This one happens to be a time card entry. It may be your order entry system. You're going to have a main menu that comes up when you log into that account. So I'm going to go to the TCL, or the terminal control language, and go down to the prompt. So if I was to log to my time card account, which is called TC on my D3 system. This is a D3 Linux that I'm working with here. When I log to that, you'll notice it brings that menu up. Well, if it did that, it had to have found that in the case of D3 or multi-value systems, it would be in the MD. In the case of a universe, it would be called VOC, but everything is going to start from that point. Since it starts from that point, we would ED that MDTC and see that it is a proc all by itself that runs this front-end program. The front-end program, if you look on line 4 here, is called BAMIT, B-A-M-I-T. If a program called BAMIT runs, it has to have existed in the MD. So we'll now look in the MD for that BAMIT, And that's going to help us to find where our basic programs are at. In this case, I'll ED, MD, BAM it, and you'll see that the first line is a VR, which just simply says it's a cataloged program under D3. And you'll find on line 4, it's actually got what the program file is that contains BAM it. So that's what we're talking about by finding your basic programs. So you'll now, if we were to edit that bam.bp, BAM it, we'll see the source code. That's the source that we're looking for. So the next thing is whose is it? Well, in this case, it says at the very beginning, property of Dano Consulting. I happen to know that guy, so I know that I have licenses to use this software, which is the next thing we're looking at. Do you have the license to use it? Is it something that you're allowed to compile and catalog? If you've got source code, you probably have a license to use it. If this came up and was not readable, that's number 4, then that means it's either encrypted or there could be a possibility there isn't any source at all. Those types of things you're going to need to know, because in order to convert to jBASE, in order to convert even to a newer version of your existing database, you're going to have that source code. So if it wasn't here or it was encrypted, then that's where questions 3, 4, and 5 come into play, in that you're going to have to contact your software people and find out, okay, I don't have the source. Who does? Where does it exist? The procs are, again, from that MD, you would possibly have found procs, and everything has to start at the MD in a multi-value system. So we can sort MD with the first field equal to PQ, and that's going to find all the procs. Now, within those procs, I'm going to change this to a sort item. I should have done that. I want to see the entire MD. Within these procs, it will branch to other proc files, possibly, or it will run programs like you saw with the TC, that it ran the actual login program in this instance. But I'm going to do this, and we'll see. Okay, remember that AHB also runs a program called Jamit. But then you'll see online in the middle of the screen there, you'll see a left paren sam.procs. That's because everything has to start in the MD in a multi-value system. And if it's running procs, it will have something like this that will refer to where the procs are. So number 2 on our list was, what is it? Is it basic? Is it procs? Well, that's proc. So if I was to list dash item bam.procs, that will show me the procs or PQN processes that run on your system. So that's another thing that you're going to want to have the source on. If we want to know where that is, we can do an ED of the MD, again, for that bam.procs, because every file has to start in the MD on a D3 or multi-value system. Since it comes back and tells me it's a file definition and can't be edited, I know it actually exists in this TC account. It could have been a Q pointer or something that existed in another account. If that's true, that your source actually exists in another account, you'll want to make note of that for later. Because at some point, when we get this over to our jBASE system, we're going to want to convert all of this source, and there may be minor changes that we'll want to make or we'll have to make, and we will want to make sure that those are sequestered and put off to the side, so that when we do the next refresh of the data, we don't overwrite any changes that we may have made. So that's why you're investigating this source at this point. The big thing during the migration checklist is just, do you have it? You know, and then where is it? And then later we'll go into when we do the transfer, how we'll want to maybe move that off to the side. I don't want to go too deep into that. The next thing is data. Where is it? data is in your files. So in this case, if I do list files here, I find out these are the different data files that exist for this TC account. That is where that data is located. Now, you'll see queues, which means they're queue pointing to another account. So in other words, if I want to run this TC application, the odds are I'm going to also need things that are in this gen.files, like the gen.bp. So let me look at gen.bp. So adnd gen.bp, and I see, oh, it's in another account called gen.bampgm. So if I'm going to convert my database over to jBASE, and I want to just convert TC, I also need to bring over gen.bampgm. So you just want to find out where all your different files and programs are located. And then, how big is that information? It could be, and the reason for the how big is it could be some historical file like invoice history, and it may be in its own place. And you may want to make sure that you have the space to move that over for one conversion, but you may not want to have to refresh that every single time. So those are the kind of notes you're making when you're looking at your data as to where it is and how. That's why you're wondering how big it is and that type of thing. And then how long is that going to take during the migration process when you're ready to go live? And is it needed immediately when you go live? Because you got to think of amount of downtime during your conversion. So that's why we're investigating the data at this point. The next thing is, what level of security do you want? Do you currently secure files at the OS level? I'm on a D3 system here, and that usually is only available on U2 type systems or Prime type systems, where D3 is a blob. In other words, it takes over the entire machine. So there really is no file security on a D3 machine. But if you were on Universe or U2, and like I said, this is for all the different platforms, this video, then you may be setting up security levels with groups and usernames and etc. You'll just want to make note of those and make sure you have those set up the same on your converted system when you convert over. If you don't currently have security but you want it, now would be the time to make note, okay, we don't have a way that secures our invoice history from people, but that's something we would like to put in its own group and make sure that only certain people would be able to access it, etc. So like I said, this is more of the note taking and the understanding what you need to do for your migration video. So where are your users based? In the world of D3, a lot of times everybody logs in as a user, like pick, into the operating system level, which would either be your Windows user or your Unix user. And then with D3, they have multiple database users. So at that point, if I was to look, there will be a users file out here, and there will be a person called DNL. And that is at the user level or at the D3 level. Does your application have its own users? A lot of people set up their system where pick is the user that they log in as. The account, such as TC, is the database user they log in as. And then once they get in, it asks for a user, which is all handled at the application level. You just want to have an idea of what you're doing before you do your conversion and whether you want to change that level and bring it up a level. There's some advantages to that of having OS level users, in that all your auditing and those types of things would be automated. So those are the kind of things you're looking at with the security and user. The next thing is connectivity of devices. How do your applications use connectivity? Do they input and output data via TCP ports? You're going to think of that more as a web-based. Like, do you have things that access your database via the internet, via the web? Do you have things that you send out two people via a TCP port of some sort? Do you have other systems that you send things to via NFS or super Q points, those type of things? Because when you set up your new jBASE server, you'll want to make sure those TCP ports are available, that they're set up, that those processes that you're using are going to be able to work on the new jBASE server. And then how do end users and devices connect? Do you have terminals coming in via, believe it or not, there are still people that have terminals that come in via serial connection into their machine. Do you have those? If you do, is your new hardware going to support that, or do you need to look at going to terminal servers, or do you want to get rid of terminals, dumb terminals completely, and consider going to something like the Accuterm product and running SSH connections? The next thing is printer connections. Again, the same thing. You may have serial connection printers. You may have print servers. You may have special devices like scales and guns that come in via some special connection into your system. You just need to, during your migration checklist, think about those things that are going to need to be checked off and known. Okay, this new server is going to handle that old way, or we're going to upgrade and get rid of the old way and come to the new way. Then are you going to do it on your existing server and move that over, or are you going to do it during the migration? Then the next thing is the transfer. How should you back up your initial system for transfer? There's going to be, that's where I was telling you there is actually a separate session depending on what type of platform you're coming from and etc. So there will be other videos on your platform and creating a save that is compatible to come over to jBASE. The other thing you need to consider at that point is, do you have physical space on your current server to store that backup? Or, are you going to a tape device that's not going to be available on your new server? So you need to consider those types of things and consider methods of transfer to your new platform. And then once you've considered those methods of transfer and you look at the other video and know how to make a backup, now you need to consider how should you refresh the data during the migration? Your programs and your source. Remember, I was saying you want to find those source items and etc. because you may need to make minor changes for them to work under jBASE. If you refresh your data, you don't want to overlay those changes. So you need to consider how you're going to keep track of those things that are altered during migration. Are you going to put them off to the side somewhere on the jBASE machine? Are you going to have your programs in a totally separate directory, separate space? So you need to take that into consideration when you're considering your transferring of your data. You're not just going to overlay everything every single time, because you'd be taking steps backwards. And then the next thing is, how often do you really need to refresh the data? You probably want to do your original refresh at a point where you have something that you can tie back to. A lot of times we do our initial refresh of data right after right before a month end, if you have a month end process that is kind of a frozen process. Because then once you've converted your new system, you can check numbers to numbers, because here is what our month end was on the old system, here's what the numbers are on our new system. And then the next thing is, how are you going to transfer that to the live jBASE converter, which is, so you've got steps. You've got things that you initially transfer it just to get it over. You've got refreshes because you want to recheck some new data and etc. And you want to make sure you don't overlay your programs. And you're really testing for your live conversion. And then you've got the live conversion. At that point, you need to consider some new things, which is downtime. How long are you going to allow the transfer to your new machine? How could you possibly take historical files, move them off to the side, and not have to have them during your live? So you need to take those things into consideration. So there's actually 3 different types of transfers you're doing: your initial transfer, your refresh transfer, and your live transfer. And then the last thing we're going to cover in here is the prepping of the new server. Where will your jBASE source and data reside? The jBASE installer is going to take care of all the prerequisites and install jBASE itself. The next thing you need to consider is where are you going to put your new jBASE system? So you probably want to have a specific device, such as a drive in the Windows environment, or a file system specifically for your jBASE data on your new system. And so you'll want to get an idea of how much you're going to need for that, how much you're going to need with growth for that. So set that up and originally prep your new system with that. Then you'll want to review, like I was saying, the reason we're looking at the section on security and users is how do we want to approach that on the new system? Do we want to match it, or do we want to upgrade it? Do we want to change it so that we originally set up prep that new system with the new way of having security and users? And then you, of course, need to make sure you have some sort of inter-machine connectivity that's going to allow that save to be moved over onto the new system. And that may be an external tape device, that may be a network connection. So that's your checklist for your migration. If you can answer these questions, you're well on the way to doing your jBASE conversion. And the next video you'll want to look at is how do I prepare my data from my specific version of MultiValue to be able to convert over to jBASE. And if you have any questions on this, the migration checklist that we're going over, or any of the other things with jBASE or the migration, check out docs.jbase.com and it will give you the information you need. I appreciate the time, and I hope this helps you to understand what we're going over in our migration checklist. And good luck on your migration.